What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Joel's Random Stuff. It's me, Joel Varghese, and let's get into another video. We're going to talk about what life was like 10 years ago in 2016 as in honor of it being 2026. So in 2016, the newest iPhone was the iPhone 7. There was no TikTok, Vine still existed, and people were confused and had multiple different ideas what life in 2026 would be like. Now that we're here, let's talk about how wrong or right everybody was about how 2026 was going to be and what life was like back in 2016. Comment down below if you think you could have lived the day back in 2016. And if you like this, please like and subscribe to my channel. I appreciate it a lot. So let's talk about how the technology was back then, because it's obviously evolved a lot from what it was like back in 2016 to right now. So back in 2016, the iPhone 7 was invented, which is crazy because now we're on like the iPhone 17. The iPhone 7 feels old, and if you had an iPhone 7, you'd probably be like, yeah, it's kind of old and stuff. But back then, it felt advanced. Like, people were thinking this was the latest, the best technology on the market, obviously because nothing more had been invented. And back then, the stuff that was on the iPhone 7 was, very basic to what the phones are like right now. So there was only one camera, or maximum two, which is crazy because now phones have like 3, 4, even 5 cameras. And the home button was still there, which feels like ages ago, to be honest with you. The screen was way tinier, and there was no Face ID where you could just show your face, now you're in on the phone. There's none of these always on display, none of these AI features, which we'll get into a little more later, and none of this dynamic island, which is, if you know, that big circular thing on the top. But back then, the phone was just meant to be a tool. Now it's become an integral part of our everyday lives, which is crazy to think about, because back then, I feel like phones were not even as common. Now, if you think about it, kids are getting phones as young as 10, 11, or 12. Back then, it was probably 15, 16, 17. Main purpose was for calling, taking pictures, videos. None of these main apps like TikTok and entertainment apps have been invented to the point of popularity which they are at today, which is crazy. Now they feel like computers. They're everywhere. It's just crazy. But let's talk about how life felt different from those, like I said, AI and TikTok standpoints. So back then, I would say being bored for a couple of minutes was normal. People weren't always constantly recording things. Not everyone was just going on TikTok and posting dances. They didn't feel that they needed to do that. Back then, it was just like, Snapchat stories, Instagram posts, stuff like that, because that's what it was there back then. But now, it's like constant notifications. You constantly are getting notifications about your TikTok. You're getting, YouTube shorts and, doom scrolling, my bad. And, you were basically, that concept had just not been invented back then, where you would just go and you had, TikTok or YouTube shorts or Instagram reels, whatever you watch. Or if you don't watch, it's honestly a great thing, but I'm sure a lot of people watch. That concept of scrolling had just not invented. Watching video for 30 seconds had not been invented yet. And, that had not even been there. So, which is crazy, which was a lot of people may not even be able to live back then, because some people are actually, they just can't live without the scrolling. That's how it feels, what it's like, it feels faster. That's why people are like, why do we have so little time? Because every one of their minutes is spent doing something. While back in 2016, maybe you still felt packed, but there was definitely more days with more open times, a little more because you found some time, because you weren't always doing something or on something, like right now, everybody is on something, everybody is doing something. Life is busy, life is productive. Not saying like it was not that busy back then, but it's definitely more busier now than it was back then, which is crazy to think about, to be honest with you. Now, but let's talk about what people thought 2016 would be like. And if you were one of those people, it's fine. I was fine back then. I personally didn't know much, but even in 2017, I was thinking there was going to be flying cars by 2025, but it's 2026 now. Hasn't even been no flying cars. People were like, robots were going to be everywhere. Obviously people were even saying, people to the extent, I'm not saying everybody said that, but people were saying there was going to be futuristic cities, no more jobs, and everything was going to be super advanced. Which obviously, when you think about it, yes, things have gotten more advanced, but they're not gotten that advanced to the point where there is like flying cars and robots everywhere. I've heard they're inventing robots, and there are robots around the world, but it's not like accessible. I'm pretty sure you don't just have a robot, doing your chores and doing your laundry. You definitely don't have flying cars. They're still building prototypes of that. So, I don't even know if it's going to be up by 2036 at this point, to be honest with you, because just they're just like not able to, build it at a rate like that, So everybody was thinking like, man, there's going to be flying cars and stuff, but unfortunately or fortunately, it's not been there yet, which is, I guess, what people said. The reality is, it's like no flying cars, same cities, It's just, I feel like the only thing that's changed is like how we think, because now we're thinking with the mindset like we have a tool to help us out rather than we just got to solve this ourselves. So yeah, that's crazy. We didn't become, as futuristic as we thought we would be, to be honest with you. But now let's talk about what's going on in the sports world in 2016. Back then, LeBron was dominating. I think if you don't remember, it was like LeBron winning the championship. Steph Curry was changing basketball. And social media wasn't everything yet, so basketball was kind of, sports, they were kind of a little bigger because they're not social media. But now there's over here where like athletes or brands, there's now things called NIL deals, sports contests everywhere, analytics dominating everything. You think about sports in 2026, there's so many international guys in the NBA now, and back then it was all American guys, but now it's just international, it's more global. You talk about the NFL, Tom Brady was dominating back then. Now it's like new guys, so just a new era for sports, which is crazy to think about. And if you talk about baseball, the Chicago Cubs, I was actually living in Chicago back then. They actually had won the championship, and it was a big deal for everybody in Chicago. And now it's like so far away, they're not even close to being contenders, so it's obviously things like that. But when you think about it, and now I'm going to talk about, I said we'll go deeper into AI now, but imagine back in 2016, I know people were thinking futuristic, but the ChatGPT had just not been invented. These AIs have been invented yet. People like, they didn't just sit there and think like, we're going to be able to solve. You can create apps with AI. You can create so many things with AI. The people just really didn't understand. Everybody knew that, tech would take over, but they didn't realize this AI field was really going to come in with so much force and end up not taking over, but, having a big presence in the field. Now everybody's trying to shift to AI, so people didn't realize how big of a deal AI would be, how there would be these chatbots and communication systems, how big ChatGPT would be. Let's be honest, when you're doing a homework assignment and you need some help, you probably go to ChatGPT and it will definitely help you out with that. So, people are using that to, help them, and for reasons that they need help with. You need help with that assignment, you go to ChatGPT. You need help with something, you probably go to, different sources like Google Gemini or whatever AI resources you're using. So it's crazy just how different the world has been, because back in 2016 you had Google search, and it wasn't that advanced. You had to scroll through multiple websites just to find one tiny piece of information. AI can give you paragraphs of info within seconds. It's just amazing how quick AI has gone, and it's just like amazing how different the world is now in 2026. But to be honest, life in 2016 wasn't even that bad. I feel like it was still great. The world wasn't that packed, slower. There was a lot of, more, I guess, free time, you could kind of say, So if you feel like 2016 was better, or would you rather live in 2026, let me know. If you can't even live a day in 2016, let me know in the comments. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you want more content, please like and subscribe, and comment what other videos you want me to post. But I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.